GMC has updated its popular entry-level terrain SUV for the 2022 model year. This volume seller from GM's brand of trucks and SUVs certainly has some tough competition right now, especially as consumers continue to move away from conventional sedans and flock towards mid-size crossovers and smaller SUVs like this guy. Hi, my name is Jake, reporting for HotCars.com, and today we're going to see if the GMC Terrain in this new off-road ready AT4 trim level can rise to the top of the pack. Oh yeah, and while we're thinking about it, go ahead and give this video a like and subscribe to the channel to see more rad car content. Adventure is out there. Get after it. That's what GMC's own website says when you look at their lineup of AT4-ified vehicles. And it makes sense. After all, trucks like the Sierra 1500 AT4 have jacked up suspensions and big chunky tires and potent V8 engines that make them kind of go anywhere, do anything sorts of vehicles. That tagline is followed by the claim that AT4 vehicles have the capability that's ready to take you to places your boundless sense of adventure can imagine. I don't know about a boundless sense of adventure. After all, I live in the gridlocked metropolitan hellscape that is Los Angeles, but I do know of a certain small test trail outside the city. And thanks to the miracles of movie magic, we happen to be, well, right there now. How convenient. The Terrain does not get similar hardware to other AT4 models in the GMC lineup. Instead, it makes do with easier to implement changes like a front skid plate and slightly chunkier Goodyear Sport Terrain tires. Oh yeah, and there's also down here a drive mode selector that now features an off-road mode, which relaxes the intervention of the ABS, electronic brake force distribution systems, and allows the all-wheel drive system to work better with those slightly chunkier tires. It may not have a locking rear diff like you'd find in a Jeep Cherokee Trailhawk, but the system does modify the logic of the ABS and electronic brake force distribution systems to better allow the all-wheel drive to work with those slightly chunkier tires when the going gets tough. Some GMC fans may bristle at the thought of this, but for most buyers, upgrading to the AT4 is really going to be more for the visual upgrades. You see, this guy gets all blacked out trim around the windows, on the mirror caps, and the wheels, and the things that aren't black instead get this cool shadow chrome effect, like on the grille and on the trunk garnish, things like that. The impact of all these visual upgrades, unfortunately, is a bit dulled against our testers' black metallic paint. No wonder all the GMC stock images have cars painted white instead to actually showcase the differences. Due to the limited hardware changes the AT4 receives, that means this thing has the same 7.9 inches of ground clearance you'll find on other all-wheel drive equipped Terrain models. Granted, that's broadly in line with the 8.5 you would find on a comparable Toyota RAV4 TRD off-road, and it should be fine for most buyers in general. I say that because as manufacturers continue to kind of pump out these off-roady, adventurous, lifestyle garnished SUVs and crossovers, it's really more of the aesthetic or the idea of this vehicle rather than its absolute capabilities. Most people aren't going to try and take this thing rock crawling, but instead hit the occasional dusty trail on the way to a hike or trailhead. Overall, the Terrain AT4 is certainly going to have enough off-road capabilities to satisfy most buyers if they do ever in fact take it off-roading. Sure, you aren't going to go rock crawling in this thing like you would a Jeep, but that's not really the point. You see, as car manufacturers continue to cater to this outdoorsy, adventurous lifestyle that millennials like us love to perceive ourselves as having, vehicles like this and its ilk, you know, the Toyota RAV4 TRD Off-Road, the Kia Sportage X-Pro Prestige, the Subaru Outback, all similar vehicles in this regard. They don't necessarily sacrifice their on-road ability for the slight increase in off-road ability that they do in fact have. You don't necessarily need 30 inches of suspension travel on 1,000 horsepower and 39-inch tires to go hit your average trail. You just don't. Since most buyers won't be as dumb as I am and try and actually off-road this thing, we should take this thing back on the road to see how it does there, in its real natural environment. And wow, look at that. Thanks again to the miracles of movie magic, I'm back on the pavement. And this is really where the Terrain makes a lot more sense. The personality of the Terrain is very relaxed. This ride is definitely geared towards being quiet and comfortable, something you can appreciate as well a family vehicle. And as far as family duty is concerned, I'm happy to report that at 6'1", I fit very comfortably in all 4 seats in this thing, and there's 30 cubic feet of storage in the trunk as well, which is pretty spacious. A bit less ample, if I'm honest, is the powertrain. Under the hood, we have a 1.5-liter turbo 4 that's good for 170 horsepower and 203 pound-feet of torque. Now, that engine's paired exclusively to a 9-speed automatic transmission, and as I mentioned before, this AT4 does have the optional all-wheel drive equip. For other Terrain models, all-wheel drive is an extra $1,600 option. This powertrain, well, it does feel a bit undersized for the application. Granted, this is not a particularly large vehicle, but it does just feel like a small engine working hard to move a big heavy car. I bring that up because previously GMC did offer the option of a 2-liter turbo that had 252 horsepower. That's a more than 50% bump over this engine. You'd think with 9 gears on tap, this transmission could make better use of what should be a fat mid-range torque delivery from this turbocharged engine, but it just kind of comes across as well a bit sleepy. 0 to 60 happens in about 9.5 seconds, which is certainly a bit pokey. You might not notice it as much around town, but on the interstate, high-speed passes in the left lane, well, they're gonna take some planning and calculation on your part. The powertrain is certainly a bit of a bummer. What's not, however, is the list of both standard and optional equipment you can get in this Terrain. Our AT4 tester is very nicely equipped, though at almost 40 grand as tested, it better be. The list of functionality is strong. We have standard wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto that works with GM's latest infotainment display here. A 7-inch display is standard, though our tester has been upgraded to an 8-inch display that comes paired with a 7-speaker Bose audio system, as well as one of the largest panoramic sunroofs I've seen in a vehicle lately. That thing is huge. In general, the cabin is all right with me. There's plenty of leather surfaces around it, all the things you touch. Though this does seem to have a slightly common GMC problem I've noticed, where a lot of things on here are slightly the wrong size. Like this storage bin here in the center console is too small for my regular sized cell phone. And it's a similar story with the door cards here that have these really small little holes that not even the tiniest of water bottles will fit in. It's like everything in here is about 20% too small for some reason. Then of course, there's a bit of that trademark GM plasticiness you just find in the interior. Some of the things you look at and touch just feel a bit too cheap for how much this thing costs. And I bring up the cost because it's such a dominating factor in this experience. The base price of this thing with no options is 31 grand, which is a seriously pricey proposition. That's thousands of dollars more than the base price of a RAV4 or a Honda CR-V or a Mazda CX-50. The list goes on. Granted, once you begin to option these vehicles up, the gap does close a bit, but I can't help but think of the fact that this is based on a Chevrolet Equinox. Yet, a comparably equipped Equinox is about 4 grand less than this, and to my eye, is there 4 grand worth of difference in this experience? Well, no. For the price point that our AT4 tester comes in, it's very hard to not recommend something like the Mazda CX-50 instead, with its athletic 2.5-liter turbo 4 and much cooler looking styling inside and out, in my opinion. And then additionally, there's things like, well, you can get a Hyundai Tucson plug-in hybrid for the same money as this. If you want something that's very economical, that's a great alternative as well. And if you want the more rugged off-roady vibes, the aforementioned Jeep Cherokee Trailhawk is just gonna be much more capable than this when push comes to shove. And so while there's nothing wrong with this experience per se, it just doesn't necessarily excel in any one category enough for me to recommend it over some of its much more appealing competition. Of course, that's only scratching on the surface of things here with the GMC Terrain and a bunch of the other vehicles I mentioned throughout this review. So if you want to learn more, you can do so by going to hotcars.com.